Good morning. We look today at 2 Chronicles 22 through 27, combining Sunday and Monday readings together, or 23 rather through 27. We looked at 22 on Saturday. But Saturday we ended with this Alethea taking the reign of Israel, and the youngest son of the former king, this son's name was Joash, was hidden away by the wife of a priest Jehoiada. And in the seventh year of this queen Alethea, we'll just call her queen. They don't call her that in the Bible, but in the seventh year that she was reigning, so this Joash was 7 years old. This priest that had been hiding him rose up against this queen and got the other priests and Levites and the guards of the temple and everybody together with him, is supporting him, to do away with the queen and to coronate this young 7-year-old boy as the king of Israel. Think about, what would our country be like if we had a 7-year-old running it? Well, we wouldn't even want to imagine that. But this priest, they all get together, and under the guard of the temple and in the temple, they coronate Joash, the 7-year-old, as the king. And they start crying out, "Long live the king, long live the king." And Alethea hears all this commotion and comes and yells, "Treason, treason," which in many ways it is. And she comes to the temple, but they say, "Well, we can't kill her in the temple." So they get her outside of the temple, and they dispatch, to say it politely, they kill Alethea, this queen. And it says that Joash ruled, ruled, and he followed the Lord's will, and he did good in his reign. Says, verse 20, chapter 24 starts, he was 7 years old, he reigned 40 years old, and they talk about, his mother's name. We know that he was the son of the former king, that had been hidden away, but they identify him also then by his mother's name as well. And he says he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and in many ways it's not surprising, because this priest Jehoiada, who was, I would assume the priests were faithful to God. No, maybe not always, but the priests were mentors for him. They were leading and guiding and advisors, and probably actually making a lot of the decisions. And they did away with some of the idols and some of the false worship, and they encouraged people in many ways to get back to following God again. And so it says, sometime after Joash decided to restore the house of the Lord, he assembled the priests and said, "Go and collect money for this, for the restoration of the temple." And so they began the restoration of the temple and gave the money to those who were working on it. And we read that basically in Kings, there are a lot of similarities in what we read in Kings and Chronicles. Sometimes Chronicles expands what the kings did, and sometimes not so awful much. And sometimes it'll research, in Kings it would say, we can find out more in Chronicles. And then in Chronicles it says the other acts of him were written in the book of the Kings. Well, so sometimes we have a little bit more in Chronicles, and then as you read and look, it'll say this is not mentioned anywhere else. Well, I've said that before. We can't have everything mentioned 2, 3, 4 times in the Bible. But the king Joash and Jehoiada ruled fairly, and were building the temple. And then as we get to verse 15 in chapter 24, Jehoiada, the priest, says, grew old and full of days, and he died at the age of 130. And, that was a long life at that time. There weren't too many that lived that long. I mean, some of the kings, were maybe 60 when they, they didn't live that long either. But and then after the king of Jehoiada, it says the officials of Judah came and did obeisance to the king. They buttered up to him, and they got the king's ear, and they got him to start doing the wrong things. It says they abandoned the house of the Lord. They put up sacred poles and the idols, and it says then the wrath came upon Judah, and God sent prophets, but they didn't listen to the prophets. And verse 20 of chapter 24, the Spirit of the God took possession of Zechariah, son of the priest Jehoiada. So we have, Zechariah, son of this priest Jehoiada, who died at 130, comes with God's word. And he says, thus says the Lord, and they don't pay attention to him. They conspire against him, and by the command of the king, they stoned him to death. So, this is one of the examples when Jesus laments over Jerusalem, the stoning of the prophets, the killing of the prophets, the ignoring the prophets, and so this is one of the things. I mean, Jesus knows that this happened when he's talking to his disciples and stuff. And as they go on through, as this Zechariah is stoned to death, he says, "May the Lord see and avenge." And this Zechariah, the son of the priest, is again one of the priestly tribe, one of the priests, and comes with a message and is ignored, and he asks for the Lord to take revenge, but probably he knows that it's like God said, "I am a jealous God, and I don't worship other gods," and the Israelites continued to do that. But at the end of that year, then it says that the army of Aram came up against Joash, and they destroyed all of the officials and the people. And even though they had come with a few men, the Lord delivered Joash's army into their hands. So here, so many times we've seen God with just a few men, destroy huge numbers of the enemy, and here, the Lord works against his chosen people that way. And it says that it was because they had abandoned the Lord their God of their ancestors, and thus they carried out their judgment against Joash. And when the army had retreated, Joash had been wounded, and then it says that they came in and they killed him on his bed. So he was executed basically by some others, and that they did not bury him in the tombs of the king. And it talks about those who conspired against him. And then as we begin chapter 25, another interesting thing I think says Amaziah reigned. He was 25 when he began to reigned 29 years. It says he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, in the sight of the Lord, yet not with a true heart. And when I read that, I thought, not with a true heart. When we the brief order of confession, I have not loved you with my whole heart, and we say that to God, and rightfully so. I mean, we don't and we can't. So, here's this king that did what was right in the sight of the Lord, but not with a whole heart. I mean, he did a few things wrong. And, it says, as soon as the royal power was in his hands, he killed the servants who had murdered his father. He took that vengeance, yet he didn't carry out any vengeance against the sons of those men, because, that was a part of the law. You don't execute the children for the sins of the father. And then it just, chapter 25 goes on, talks about Amaziah and his reign, and how he hired men to do things that he had hired as he was going to go to battle. He didn't think he had enough of his own men. So this is being the king of Judah. He hires and pays money for some soldiers from Israel, from the other, from the northern kingdom, southern kingdom differentiation here again. So he pays 100 talents of silver for 100,000 mighty warriors. But a man of God comes and says, "O king, don't let the army of Israel go with you." I mean, that's, God is against them. And if that happens, God will be against you. And so the king says, "But what about all the money I spent?" Consider it a lesson. Consider it a lesson. Sometimes we need to cut our losses and run, so to speak. But these men that he let go, as they went back home, rampaged and murdered and killed a bunch of people and plundered on their way out and everything. So it wasn't good that way. And Amaziah, there just was problems for Amaziah in his reign as well. And chapter 26 talks about King Uzziah, who's the next king coming along, and how he does, what was right in the Lord, and he rebuilt some things and different things that way. But then he kind of got full of himself, a little bit too cocky, and so his reign didn't end well either. In chapter 27 that we finished with today, talks about Jotham was 25 years old when he began to reign, and reigned 16 years. And again, it's names his mother to definitely identify who he was. And he said he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, as did his father Uzziah, but he didn't invade the temple. And that was what Uzziah did wrong, was that Uzziah, the king, who was not a priest, not a Levite, went into the temple to burn incense and to make an offering himself. And that was, and the priest said, "You can't do this. This is sacrilege." And so this was what Uzziah did wrong, whereas his son Jotham didn't do that. And he built cities and had a good reign. And so when he died, it says, they buried him with his ancestors in the city of David. So this was a king then that was buried in the tomb of the kings. Not all of them were. And on this day, as always, may God richly bless you.